outstretched into the night, empty except for the hurried sound of footsteps. She was gasping for air, her whole body shaking, part exhaustion, part pure terror. Her clothes were ripped, handcuffs dug tightly into her skin and smeared with blood, some hers, some not. She wasn't supposed to get out, not from that place, not from him. Behind her, swallowed by the mist, the Pickton pig farm loomed, a place where people went in, but never came out. To understand this story, we need to go back to the beginning, before the headlines, before the police investigation, before the horrors of the farm became known to the world. There was Robert Pickton, a child growing up in the shadows of a family that lived on the fringes of society. Robert William Pickton was born on October 24, 1949, in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, Canada. He was the middle child of Leonard and Louise Pickton, who ran a pig farm spanning 17 acres just outside Vancouver. The Picktons were known in the community for their filthy, unkempt property and their reclusive, unpleasant nature. The farm, overrun with rusting equipment and piles of garbage, would become the foundation for the darkness that would later unfold. Louise Pickton was the dominant figure in the family, ruthless, crude, and completely devoid of warmth. She prioritized the farm over the well-being of her children, expecting them to work long hours in squalor. Leonard, their father, was emotionally absent and rarely intervened in the children's upbringing. Their older sister, Linda, was sent away to live with relatives early on, as their parents believed that a pig farm was not a suitable place for a girl to grow up. This left Robert and his younger brother, David, to endure their mother's harsh and often brutal discipline. Robert was a quiet and socially awkward child, often struggling in school due to learning difficulties and his generally strange demeanor. He was frequently bullied. Other children taunted him for his dirty clothes and foul odor, the result of never being taught proper hygiene. His mother, who also rarely bathed, saw no issue with his lack of cleanliness. Over time, the bullying and neglect further isolated Robert from the outside world. However, despite his struggles with human relationships, Robert formed a deep emotional bond with animals, particularly a small calf he had been given to care for. For the first time in his life, he felt love and attachment. But his mother, unmoved by sentiment, slaughtered the calf while he was at school. When he returned home to find his beloved pet gone, she coldly instructed him to check the barn. There, among the blood and carcasses of other livestock, he discovered what remained of his friend. His mother's lesson was clear. Attachment was weakness, and death was inevitable. From that day forward, something inside Robert Pickton shifted. He stopped showing emotions, no crying, no affection, no outward signs of distress. He had learned to compartmentalize death in a way that would later define his crimes. Many dark rumors swirled around the Pickton family, whispered in hushed voices behind closed doors, and passed down like a sinister legend. One particularly chilling story involved a young boy who had gone missing in Port Coquitlam when Robert was still a child. According to the rumors that spread through the town, the boy had been struck by a Pickton vehicle, likely driven by Louise herself. Whether it was an accident or something more deliberate, no one could say for certain. But what made the tale truly horrifying was what allegedly happened next. Instead of reporting the accident, Louise was said to have made a gruesome decision. The Pickton farm had a solution for anything that needed to vanish, and she knew how to use it. The boy's body, if the rumors were true, had been disposed of in the most convenient way possible, fed to the pigs. It was a method as brutal as it was effective. Pigs would eat nearly anything, and within hours, there would be no trace left behind. No evidence, no questions. Just another shadow swallowed by the Picktons' land. There was never an official investigation. The Picktons were known to keep to themselves, and the police, whether due to disinterest or a quiet understanding, had little inclination to dig into the family's affairs. The missing boy faded from public memory, swallowed by time and silence. For those who believed the whispers, the implications were chilling. If Robert had grown up in a household where death was treated as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a tragedy to be mourned, then what limits would he recognize? What boundaries would he ever fear? Perhaps that was the most terrifying part, not just the cruelty, but the ease, the quiet, the way one life could be erased without consequence, without justice, without so much as a second glance. In the late 1970s, Leonard Pickton passed away in 1977, followed by Louise in 1979. With their parents gone, Robert and David inherited the pig farm, a sprawling property on the outskirts of Port Coquitlam. As the surrounding area developed, the land's value skyrocketed, and the brothers capitalized on it, selling off portions and amassing a fortune of approximately $5.16 million Canadian dollars. Yet, rather than reinvesting in the farm or securing their future, they allowed the property to descend into chaos. The once functional pig farm became a decaying, lawless wasteland, a place where few dared to trespass, and even fewer questioned what went on behind its rusted gates. The Pickton brothers quickly became infamous in town. David, brash and aggressive, had a knack for getting into trouble, while Robert remained quiet and withdrawn, spending more time with animals than people. But despite their contrasting personalities, they shared a disregard for rules, authority, and human life itself. In the 1990s, that disregard turned into something much darker. With no one watching and no one caring, the Picktons devised a plan that would cement their legacy in history. Vancouver's downtown east side had long been a place of suffering. Plagued by poverty, addiction, and violence, the neighborhood was home to some of the city's most vulnerable residents. For decades, women had been disappearing from its streets. Many of them, indigenous sex workers, largely ignored by society. Between 1978 and 2001, at least 65 women vanished without a trace. Despite mounting concerns from activists and desperate pleas from family members, police dismissed the cases. Officers claimed the women were transients, drifters who had likely left the city on their own accord. With no immediate pressure to investigate, authorities looked the other way, allowing predators to operate unchecked. Robert Pickton took full advantage of this apathy. He became a familiar face in the downtown east side, lurking on street corners, offering rides, money, drugs, anything to lure women into his truck. Some went with him willingly, hoping for a temporary escape from hardship. Others never had a choice. Once they crossed the gates of the Pickton farm, they entered a nightmare from which they would never escape. And for Robert, one hunting ground wasn't enough. He had bigger plans. In 1996, the Pickton brothers decided to take their lawlessness to the next level. They established the Piggy Palace Good Times Society, a registered nonprofit organization with an official mission statement to organize, coordinate, manage, and operate special events, functions, dances, shows, and exhibitions on behalf of service organizations, sports organizations, and other worthy groups. In reality, it was a front for something far more sinister. The brothers converted an old slaughterhouse on the farm into a makeshift nightclub where they hosted wild, drug-fueled parties. They called it the Piggy Palace, a name that soon became infamous in Port Coquitlam and beyond. These gatherings attracted a dangerous mix of people, local criminals, gang members, and drifters, but most notably, the Hells Angels. David Pickton had long-standing ties to the notorious outlaw biker gang, and the farm quickly became a hub for their illicit activities. Drug deals, weapons trafficking, prostitution rings. All of it happened on Pickton property, and the brothers didn't just allow it, they profited from it. But for Robert, the Piggy Palace wasn't just about money. It was an opportunity, one that ensured a steady stream of vulnerable women passing through his farm. The drugs, the chaos, the lawlessness. It all provided the perfect cover for what he was really doing. No one asked questions. No one suspected a thing. And for years, no one stopped him. On March 23, 1997, Wendy Lynn Eistetter stumbled into a hospital emergency room, bleeding profusely from multiple stab wounds. She was hysterical, shaking, and barely coherent, but her story sent chills down the spines of the medical staff. She had escaped from Robert Pickton's pig farm. Wendy, a sex worker from Vancouver's downtown east side, recounted a horrifying tale. She had gone to the farm willingly, lured by Pickton's promises of money and drugs. Once there, however, he had turned on her, attacking her with a knife. In the ensuing struggle, she managed to fight back, grabbing the very weapon he was using against her and stabbing him before fleeing for her life. The police were called, and Pickton was arrested that same night at the very same hospital where he was receiving treatment for the stab wound to his neck. It seemed like a breakthrough. Finally, authorities had a witness who had survived an attack and could place him at the center of a violent crime. But in a stunning display of incompetence, the police failed to act decisively. The case against Pickton unraveled due to procedural errors and the authorities' general apathy toward crimes against sex workers. Wendy Lynn Eistetter was a drug user, and the police deemed her an unreliable witness. The charges against Pickton were quietly dropped, and he was released back into the world, free to continue his gruesome activities. The horror of the Pickton farm was allowed to persist for another 5 years, during which many more women would disappear under mysterious circumstances. It wasn't until February 5, 2002, that the police finally took decisive action. Following a tip-off about illegal firearms on the property, authorities executed a search warrant at the Pickton farm. What they found was far beyond what they had expected. In the filth-ridden slaughterhouse, amidst rusted tools and the stench of decay, investigators uncovered evidence that would shake Canada to its core. Bloodstains, DNA traces, and personal belongings of multiple missing women were discovered scattered across the property. Investigators found remains that had been processed in a manner consistent with disposal methods used on the farm. Some reports suggested human flesh may have been mixed with pork and distributed, adding to the horrifying nature of the case. While rumors circulated about more extreme findings, official reports focused on forensic evidence linking Pickton to numerous victims. Further searches revealed that Pickton had been grinding human flesh and mixing it with pork meat, which he then distributed throughout the city. Had they unknowingly consumed the victims? The sheer depravity of his crimes was beyond comprehension. The police soon realized they were dealing with one of the worst serial killers in Canadian history. By April 2002, Pickton was formally charged with the murders of 6 women. Over time, that number would increase as forensic evidence linked him to more victims. Authorities believed he had killed at least 23 women, though Pickton himself boasted to an undercover officer that his actual count was 1 short of 50. The trial of Robert Pickton began on January 22, 2007. It was one of the most complex and costly criminal proceedings in Canadian history, lasting almost a year. The prosecution focused on the 6 strongest cases, as the sheer volume of evidence made it impossible to charge him with all the suspected murders in a single trial. Forensic experts and investigators painted a gruesome picture of Pickton's crimes. The defense, however, attempted to cast doubt on his direct involvement, suggesting that others may have been responsible for the killings. The jury deliberated for 10 days before reaching a verdict. On December 9, 2007, Pickton was found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years, the maximum penalty in Canada at the time. The impact of his crimes extended far beyond the courtroom. The case highlighted deep systemic failures in how law enforcement handled crimes against vulnerable women, particularly Indigenous women and sex workers. It exposed the indifference of society toward the disappearances of marginalized people and led to renewed calls for reform in police investigations. The Pickton case also forced Canada to confront a horrifying reality that for decades, a predator had been operating in plain sight, taking advantage of a broken system that allowed him to evade justice. His crimes left a lasting scar on the nation, sparking inquiries into missing and murdered Indigenous women and pushing authorities to take long overdue action. Robert Pickton remains in prison, but the echoes of his brutality continue to haunt those who survived, the families of his victims, and a country that failed to stop him until it was too late.
Thank you for tuning in. Let me know in the comments your thoughts. If you're fascinated by chilling mysteries, puzzling disappearances, and haunting tales, Midnight Echoes is your destination. Subscribe, like, share, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload, because the darkest truths often emerge just when you think the night is quiet. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.